going to learn how to make this cute Mrs. Weasley sweater Christmas ornament from Harry Potter, which is actually the same technique that you would use to make a regular adult size raglan sweater. We're going to start with 2 different colors of ideally the same worsted weight yarn. The duplicate stitch will be a lot more even if you use the same brand and size of yarn in 2 different colors. I then have a set of 5 knitting needles. I'm using size 6 knitting needles, and I have cast on all of my cast on stitches onto 1 needle plus 1. So the pattern calls for 16. I have cast on 17. I'm going to start them by spreading out my stitches. And there's another whole video on how to knit with double pointed needles and some tips for keeping it even. I will assume for now that you know how to use double pointed needles. The one extra stitch was to help us connect the stitches into a loop. So here we are. I have all of my stitches spread around. I'm going to let that tail piece come down to the bottom. And you'll see I was careful not to twist any of my stitches. They're all laid out with the bottom part in the middle. And now for the needle that has my working yarn and the needle beside it that's the other end, I'm going to pull the stitches to the end. And I'm going to start by just slipping the stitch that has my working yarn attached to it. I'm going to slip that stitch over to my left hand needle, and I'm going to pull that first stitch over and off, over the slip stitch and off. So now I have a nice connected even circle, okay, a nice ring. I'm now going to scoop my right stitches back to the middle, and I'm going to knit with my empty needle. The pattern says that the first thing we do is to knit all the way around, which I'm going to do. And then I'm going to place a stitch marker. You know, because this is just a Christmas ornament, is a stitch marker absolutely necessary? No, because the tail piece kind of hangs down right where it started. So that is certainly an option, just to follow where the tail piece is, but I find it to be helpful in the future rounds, so I just start using the stitch marker right from the first round. And this is where I want to place my needle, my marker, but of course that would then fall right between these 2 needles, which isn't going to work because it would just fall off. So instead I'm going to place it and then knit 1 more. And actually every time I go around the circle I knit 1 more so that I'm careful not to get any ladders between my stitches. So that is the first row. You'll see now as I finish this next needle that only had 3 stitches because I borrowed 1 in order to place the stitch marker, I'm going to knit 1 more off the left needle and then just keep going around like that for another couple of rows. After I knit my 3 rounds, this is knit from the top, so this is the little collar on the sweater that we've just finished. And now the pattern says to knit front back. To do that, you knit the front, then the first part of the stitch just like usual, but instead of sliding it off, you then come around and knit again through the back loop. So now I've got 2 stitches on my right needle when I slide off. And then knit 1. And my next one, again, because I always kind of scooch around 1 stitch to avoid laddering, I'm going to do 1 more with that right working needle, knit into the front of the stitch like usual. Before sliding off, I knit into the back and then come off the needle. It says do that twice in a row. Oops. Knit 3. And these increases are where you can see on here, it's where we start to go out like this. And it happens on the front and the back. Those are the increases, you get wider and wider. So you keep just following the pattern like that until it tells you that you're below the sleeves. and then I'll show you what to do then. It's very easy with this pattern to lose where you are on the rows where you're doing increases. So one tip is that you can see when you do the knit front back, when you knit in the back, it makes it like a little purl bump in the front. So you can see where your last ones of those were, and that's the last time you did knit front back. So on this one, I have one stitch, so it was a regular knit stitch. The next pair is a knit front back, because I can see that little purl bump right there. And then I've got another knit front back. There's the purl bump. And then I knit 5 regular knit stitches. So I can see where I am in the pattern. Here I have finished the last round of increases and the round where you just knit all the way around. And I've divided my stitches. This is where my stitch marker was, right here, where my working yarn is coming off. And I've divided my stitches so that the needle, there's 11 stitches on the next needle, then 13, then 11, and then 13. So these ones with 11 are going to become the sleeves. The first step then is to move the sleeve stitches onto a scrap of yarn. So I just have a short piece of yarn that I've threaded onto a needle, and I just slip the stitches off, just as if I was going to slip them onto a knitting needle. And I do that all the way across until they're all on that scrap yarn. There we go. And then pull it through, remove the needle, and I just tie it in a loose knot. It's just really to keep it out of your way at this point. And do the same on the other side. After the sleeve stitches are moved onto the scrap yarn on both sides, redistribute the stitches, the live stitches, so that they're across 2 needles on each side. These are the stitches we're going to keep knitting, and we're going to disregard the stitches that are on the scrap yarn. One more. Okay, we're going to move all of this out of the way and find our working yarn. So here is the working yarn. That's my tail yarn still in my way. And basically now we have to join this all the way across over to the other side so that it makes a little sleeve. Okay. And to do that, we're going to take our other needle. And this is one in particular to try to make this stitch pretty tight. There's almost always a gap that has to be cleaned up under the arm that you have to stitch shut later. So try to make that stitch tight, and actually the next stitch tight is a big help with that little hole. It's still going to happen, but can do our best to minimize the damage. And now you knit all the way around. One tip is to stop. So you're going to knit, knit, knit until there are 22 or 23 rows, kind of whatever you like. And in just a moment, I'll show you how to count those. Here we go. First, I'm going to do the join across this other side. I'm going to go ahead and do it with the needle I was on, that right needle, because again, I think that helps make it just a little bit tighter. And one more. Both those stitches I'm going to make just a little bit tighter. Okay. And then I would just keep going. But one thing I want to stop and show you is how to count how many rows. So you're going to count the rows from this little top of your sweater, this little mock turtleneck that we've created. And basically each V is a row. Put this on top so you can see it better. All right. So let's count, we'll count this one. Okay, this one right here. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then 1 on the needle, it's 13. So you don't have to add a stitch marker and count as you go. You can really just go and then stop periodically and count. And once you hit 22, 23 rows from the top neckline, then you're done. And I like to do that last row until the middle of the back of my sweater. So I'll decide whichever side I think is cuter. The other side will become the back. I'll stop in the middle, and then there's 1 row of purl around, and you just bind off using a normal traditional bind off. So I finished the sweater part and did 1 of the sleeves, and we're going to do the other sleeve together. So first I'm just going to snip off that yarn, and I'm going to pick up the stitches before I remove the yarn. There's a big hole here across kind of the bottom where we join the 2 sides together, and I want to put all of those stitches onto 1 needle. So I'm going to put 2 from one side and then come over and put 2 from the other side. Oops, that one is always a little tricky right there at the end. And this time we're just going to use 3 needles, and we will knit with the 4th needle. It's really too few stitches to try to get a 5th needle going. 2 will have 4 stitches, 1 will have 3 stitches. All right, once that's all in there, then you can pull out the scrap yarn. This is where it's particularly helpful to have done the scrap yarn in a different color. Okay, we're done with that now. Next, we need to make sure that we are lined up the correct way for knitting. This is one of the tricky parts, because you might pick up right here, but then you're knitting on the inside, which is not ideal. So you want to knit like you're looking at the right side, the correct side of the sweater, and you'll be going down the sleeve. So we started knitting at the top and went down. You're still doing the same, starting at the top and knitting down. I want to add my yarn on the wrong side. So I've decided this is the wrong side where I did the bind off. So that's how I want to add my yarn, is on this wrong side. But I kind of want to still do it down here by the base. So I'm going to pick this one as we're getting to do the space underneath the arm of the sweater. Oops. To rejoin, I insert my 4th needle in the right on the first stitch, and then I take my yarn and just make a loop and put it over my right needle and pull that through. And then make sure you're working with the working end, not the tail end, and knit across. Again, try to make that stitch right under that arm gap a little bit tighter than usual, and the next one as well. And then you just continue like that all the way around until, when counting from the top of the sweater again, you count down, it's 18 to 19 rows is where you will stop at the end of the sleeve. And again, bind off the sleeve at the back of the sweater. You can put another row of purl, or you can just bind it off. I have finished my sweater and sewn in all the ends. You notice that I mentioned you would have a hole under the arm. It's very normal with this type of sweater. So you just take your yarn and just stitch it closed. And then after you have finished that, you can turn it right back, right side out again for a minute. After you finish that, you sew on your duplicate stitch to do your letters. And I have a separate video for how to do that. You can see I started it here. And then you will be all finished with your sweater.